right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for listening here today, whatever day you're listening to this. Of course, this is the ETS Travel Podcast. We're so blessed to be able to share this experience with you in this podcast. It's definitely a great time. I'm John Cavara, and I'm joined with Bethany Barbary, as always, here.
Hi, everybody.
We're ETS Business Development Managers, and we got a pretty packed one for you today. So we're going to jump right into this thing here. So today, we're going to cover the very, very heart of Catholicism, Rome and the Vatican. So this is going to be a pretty packed one here. So definitely,
Sure, but not even just like Catholicism. There's so much early Christian heritage we're going to talk about, in the time that Peter and Paul spent there. It's really, really impactful. I don't want to scare away too many Protestants, but, there's so much to see in Rome, even if you're not Catholic. So we're going to definitely dive into those sites today.
Of course. Just a disclaimer. My Italian father would be very disappointed in me, but there are a lot of things that I am not the best at pronunciation. So this is going to be a pretty Bethany heavy podcast here. Of course, with her great pronunciation of these places and words that are just pretty big here. So of course, we'll just jump right into it here, and then we'll cover Rome and the Vatican. So. Just some quick facts before we jump into this. For 2,000 years, Rome has been the center of Christian faith. So this isn't just another pilgrimage stop. This is something that's very unique. This is beating the heart of the church here, the beating heart of the church, rather, where St. Peter was martyred and buried, and where popes have guided the faith, and where pilgrims encounter the universality of Catholicism in its fullest expression here. So to understand Rome as a pilgrim is to understand the church itself. So we'll just get right into this here, and then we'll start with Rome, the city, and the apostles here.
Awesome. Yes, Rome was definitely the city of the apostles. So, when you're reading the book of Acts and starting to read about Paul's missionary journeys and what all of the apostles were doing, many of them did end up in Rome at one point in time or another. And many of them did end their lives in Rome. So, the proto-martyrs of Rome were the first Christians persecuted en masse by Emperor Nero in the year 64. So this was before the martyrdom of Saints Peter and Paul. Nero was widely believed to have caused the fire that burned down much of Rome in the same year, yet he blamed the fire on the Christians and put them to death, many by crucifixion, being fed to wild animals in his circus, or being tied to posts and lit up as human torches.
Wow.
Today, the Piazza dei Protomartiri Romani, so the square of the Roman proto-martyrs in the Vatican next to St. Peter's Basilica, is dedicated to them. These martyrs were called the disciples of the apostles, and their firmness in the face of the gruesome deaths were a powerful testimony that led to many conversions in the early Roman Church. You can even read about it in ancient Roman writings as well. In the Annals of Tacitus, it reads, "To get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. Christus, for whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for that moment, again broke out, not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and became popular." So this is how the Romans were talking about Christianity and its spread and what, Peter and Paul were trying to do at the time. So It's really, really fascinating to see that in historical writings.
Yeah.
And in talking about some of the sites that have the most history and are absolutely must visits, of course, St. Peter's Basilica. So this was built over Peter's tomb. He's considered to be the first pope and the leader of the apostles. And Rome's Christian identity really grew from this persecution. And we're going to talk a little bit more about St. Peter's Basilica and why that area is so important. But, as I was saying, Rome's Christian identity really did grow out of that persecution. Catacombs where early Christians prayed there in secret. The Roman Empire legally recognized Pauline Christianity only as a valid religion, almost 300 years after Nero had started persecuting Christians in 313 CE. So later in the century, in 380 CE, Roman Catholicism really became the official religion of the Roman Empire. So to walk into Rome is to walk in the path of those first martyrs. And I want everyone to remember St. Peter was, of course, crucified upside down near Vatican Hill, where his tomb now lies on the high altar, underneath the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica. But it's so important to remember he was crucified upside down because he didn't want to be thought of as the same as Jesus, who he regarded so much higher than himself. So he didn't believe he was deserving to be crucified in the same way. And then, if you go outside the walls, St. Paul was beheaded actually outside of the city walls at the time. And then the Basilica of St. Paul outside the wall really was built to honor his sacrifice, but it wasn't the actual spot where he was beheaded. So we'll talk more about that later. And pilgrims often say standing in front of these tombs really feels like touching the very foundations of the church, because these are probably your two most influential apostles that inspired or wrote so much of the New Testament and what we're still preaching and reading about today. Mm-hmm. So to talk a little bit more about the Vatican area and why it's the center of the universal church, it is the smallest country in the world, yet it's 1.4 billion Catholic spiritual capital. So roughly 1 in 2 Christians around the world are Roman Catholics, and 1 out of every 6 people worldwide. So, if you are a travel advisor that's not necessarily a Catholic, we're hoping this educates you so you can talk to them and feel a little more comfortable reaching out to them, because there are a lot of Catholics in the world. Yeah. It is the largest Christian denomination at this point. So the area around the Vatican was originally a marshy area known as Ager Vaticanus, which is where the Vatican City gets its name from now. So Nero took this area and built his circus for chariot races and shows. And the Pope, being the successor of St. Peter, shepherds the universal church from here. So, it started out as a marshy, uninhabitable place. Nero built it as his circus for entertainment and games and to torture. And now it's the home of the universal church. So it's kind of funny how God uses places for specific reasons.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, you have within the Vatican City complex, St. Peter's Basilica. So you have Michelangelo's beautiful dome, you have Bernici's Baldarian, you have the Pieta. But above all, this is a place where faith and worship converge. And, our pilgrims, that's always something so special when we're able to arrange for them to have Mass right there in St. Peter's Basilica at the side of the tomb. And of course, we make sure they're going to go through the Vatican Museum and, of course, see the amazing Sistine Chapel. So beauty as theology, proclaiming the gospel through art is another great thing about pilgrimage, and just seeing, how much God can inspire man to create truly beautiful artwork through the story of Christianity and telling it. So the Vatican is a voice of the world is another thing you'll learn about. So between encyclicals and councils and declarations that have shaped history. And, just getting to experience a papal audience or Mass in that area, being there on a Sunday when the Pope is leading the Angelus with thousands of other pilgrims gathered, experiencing the church's universality, it's really amazing and special. So I highly encourage anyone that's going to Rome, whether you're Catholic or not, it's a really unique experience to be there and see a tradition that's lasted for, over 1,000 years and worship with these people. So priests often remark that celebrating Mass here connects them to the global church in a unique way, because it is truly like the home of the Catholic Church. And of course, visitors to the Sistine Chapel describe just the amazing awe, not just at Michelangelo's ceiling, but the sense of faith communicated through the beauty that was inspired by God. So, I hope everybody gets the chance to go to Rome at least once, even if you are not Catholic, or even if you're not particularly faithful, just the amount of beautiful art that was inspired by those that were faithful, it's just absolutely tremendous all throughout the city.
Oh, of course, of course. And just back, because we get a lot of questions about the papal audience and all of that. So do they also do those on Wednesdays, or are they just Sundays?
Yeah, so the papal audience, the wider address by the Pope to the faithful, is every Wednesday when he's in residence, because of course he does make official trips and visits and those kind of things. So he does travel outside of Rome, but whenever he's in Rome and as his health permits, of course, he has the Wednesday audience, the papal audience. And then on Sunday, you have the Angelus. So again, he's celebrating the Mass and speaking to the people on Sunday. So, you can go and celebrate with the Pope on either Wednesday or Sunday. So we design most of our pilgrimage trips so that you are either there for a Wednesday to be there for the papal audience, which is the more popular thing to do, or at least you're able to potentially attend the Angelus on Sundays.
Awesome. Because I know that's a question that comes up a lot, especially when we're doing, custom itineraries, making sure that that time falls on one of those days. Obviously,
I always have to work with the people arranging, especially custom pilgrimages, and be like, have you looked at your dates and the nights you want to be in Rome?
Oh yeah.
Are you sure you don't want to back this up a few days so you're there for Wednesday or Sunday so we can
Yeah, super important. Yeah, have to get
those, you there.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably one of the biggest draws of doing pilgrimage to the Vatican there. So thank you for clarifying that. And so we're going to throw it to a quick commercial break. Then on the other side, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about some of the holy sites of Rome that you can expect to see on a pilgrimage. So without further ado, we'll throw it to this commercial break and be right back.
Whether it's inspiration you're looking for or a fresh dose of hope, whether you're on a quest for truth or seeking forgiveness, a pilgrimage of faith gives you all these opportunities and more. Celebrate Mass and sing with fellow pilgrims during candlelight processionals. Pray the rosaries and pause at each decade along sacred paths. Walk the stations of the cross as you meditate on Christ's suffering. Ponder the messages the Blessed Virgin Mary gave visionaries. Explore the sites where Jesus Christ lived and died and where saints led. Imagine being in the Holy Land, along the Via Dolorosa and the original Stations of the Cross, ending in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Sail the Sea of Galilee where Jesus called St. Peter. Worship at the church in Cana, the site where Jesus turned water into wine, and pray on the Mount of Beatitudes, where Jesus delivered his most famous sermon. Venture to the Vatican, where all popes have led the church throughout millennia. Meditate in the many chapels, churches, and cathedrals in Scotland, Ireland, Poland, and beyond. Discover the places where Our Lady revealed herself and delivered unique messages of faith, hope, and love to the young and poor. In Mexico, a place of miraculous healings. In Fatima, where 3 children received encouragements of peace. In Lourdes, where a young girl sparked a message of God's healing. And in Medjugorje, where hope and comfort came to 6 ordinary teenagers. Renew your faith and re-energize your life as you celebrate Mass, pray the Rosary, and linger at the Stations of the Cross on a Catholic pilgrimage. Call your local travel advisor today.
All right, back from commercial break here. So some of the 4 major basilicas here, you talked about some of them already, but we'll just go a little bit more in depth here. So first we'll start with St. Peter's Basilica, very important, of course. So this was built over Peter's tomb, Constantine's original basilica, rebuilt in Renaissance. So the importance is it is the largest church in the world and the heart of Catholicism. And then, of course, while pilgrims are there, they feel an overwhelming universality praying at Peter's tomb. And then, of course, St. Peter's Square, the Vatican obelisk.
I got you, John.
Again, yep, that's why you're here. And then the obelisk in St. Peter's Square is the last visible remnant of the Circus of Nero, which Bethany covered earlier. Tradition states that it was in this circus that St. Peter was crucified upside down. From here, the Pope addressed the faithful So very important, the St. Peter's Basilica for many reasons there. And then, the second of the four major basilicas is St. Paul outside the walls. Of course, you alluded to this earlier. So while Paul was originally buried within 2 miles of the site of his martyrdom, Constantine erected a basilica on the current site. In the 4th century, what is believed to be Paul's remains were moved here.
Yeah, and funny story about that, when they later did radio dating, they identified, obviously we don't have Paul's DNA, but they identified that the remains that are buried there do date back to between the 1st and 2nd centuries.
Wow.
So
it's incredible stuff there. And of course, a lot of mosaics, like you said, ton of artwork throughout the city in general, tons of mosaics, portraits of the Pope, and also a reminder of missionary zeal as well. So this is a place where pilgrims reflect on their own missionary call here. So it's a very powerful place when we're talking about this basilica here. And then the next is St. John Lateran. So the Pope's Cathedral as Bishop of Rome here. So it is dedicated to John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. Fun fact, it's the oldest of 4 papal basilicas, so it's definitely has some seniority there. And then the title of it is Most Holy Lateran Church, Mother and Head of all churches in the city and the world. So it's a very, very powerful place to be. And then during the Second World War, the Lateran and its related buildings were used under Pope Pius as a safe haven from the Nazis and Italian fascists for numbers of Jews and other refugees. So the 12 niches house statues of the apostles, the skull of St. Peter and St. Paul are also believed to be buried within the Archbasilica. The Scala Santa or Holy Stairs can be visited nearby as well. And the importance is it symbolizes the papal authority and continuity, which is very, very powerful there as well. And then last but not least, the Basilica of St. Mary Major. So this is the largest Marian church in Rome. After the Council of Ephesus 431, it has been a place of worship for 16 centuries now. 16 centuries. So the miracle of the snows is recalled each year here in solemn celebration. During the liturgy, a shower of white petals fall from the ceiling, creating an almost perfect union between the congregation and the Mother of God. The basilica houses the most important Marian icon, the Solace of Populi Romani. Hopefully pronounced that somewhat correct there. Tradition attributes the image to St. Luke, the evangelist, and the patron saints of painters. So
it's supposed to be one of the earliest depictions of Mary and tied into how St. Luke represented her. So it's believed it was divinely inspired and given to St. Luke. So it's one of the cooler art pieces if you're going through and seeing and then learning more about the history of iconography.
And then the relic of the Holy Crib, the manger in which baby Jesus was laid to rest, highlights the importance of St. Mary Major as the Bethlehem of the West. The first Christmas night mass was celebrated here, as pontiffs have been keeping this tradition alive for centuries now. So among the basilica's most important relics are the remains of St. Matthew and St. Jerome. 7 popes are also buried in the basilica here, including Pope Francis, who was interred this year after his passing. Pope Francis entrusted his apostolic journeys to the protection of the Solace Populi Romani, the image of Mary, which he visited before every departure and every return. And pilgrims sense Mary's maternal protection here and remember the miracle of Christ's birth here. So There's also other holy sites as well. Did you want to cover some of those here?
Yeah, I'll talk about some of my favorites. So one of the most fascinating ones that's also worth visiting outside of the Papal Basilicas is to go and visit Mamertine Prison. So this is where Paul and Peter were both held prisoner. It's Rome's oldest maximum security prison. And this is where anyone that was sentenced to death was held before their executions. While there, Peter was able to give witness to the gospel even during his time in prison. He gave witness to his own prison guards who were watching over him. He was able to tell them about the gospel, and they listened to his words, and they welcomed the message of the gospel into their hearts. And they wanted to be baptized, but there was no water with which to baptize them. So Peter would have had water spring forth miraculously so that he was able to use the water to baptize them. These prison guards, their names are Precisus and Martianus, and so they themselves became martyrs of the gospel later. So even within prison, there's more miracles and more work God puts out through people, and it's fascinating as we're starting to cover sites of miracles and things. I'm always fascinated by how often water is a part of it because water is so necessary to life. So it's always an interesting theme to watch out for. Continuing with that theme of water, another great place. It is not common to visit on our itineraries, but if you're customizing, I do recommend it. But visiting St. Paul Church at the Three Rivers, this is believed to be the site of his beheading. And the legend is St. Paul was decapitated there, and as Rome did not allow its citizens to be crucified because he actually was a Roman citizen. So his severed head allegedly bounced 3 times, miraculously giving rise to a source of water each time it touched the ground. Wow. This is how the place earned the name San Paolo alle Tre Fonti, meaning St. Paul at the Three Fountains. And of course, it's always worth a visit as long as you're not claustrophobic or afraid of being underground. But taking some time to go through the catacombs of Rome, where so much early Christianity happened, this is where the early Christians had to bury their dead. This is where during different times of persecution, they would pray in secret, and even painting symbols of hope and building these huge, church areas underground. It's absolutely fascinating if you ever get the chance to go down there. And it's a true testimony to courage, even in times of persecution. So the 2 I really recommend is going to the catacombs of San Sebastiano, and that's right there by the Appian Way. So the martyrs, Sebastian, Quirinius, and Eutychius are all buried here, and the relics of the saints were hidden here during different times of persecution as well. And then the most popular one that a lot of people visit is the catacombs of St. Calixtus. So this was the official cemetery of the Church of Rome in the 3rd century AD. So around 500,000 Christians are buried here, among them many martyrs and 16 different popes. Wow. So this set of catacombs was named after the deacon, St. Calixtus, who at the beginning of the 3rd century was assigned by Pope Zephyrinus to the administration of the cemetery. So they originated about the middle of the 2nd century and are part of a huge cemeterial complex. So it's almost impossible to go through the entire catacombs. Generally, our groups are only going through a certain area because it is 90 acres. So 90 acres with a network of galleries about 12 miles long in 4 levels, more than 20 meters deep. Usually our groups go down there for about an hour and kind of see the highlights. And we've even had groups do mass and stuff down there. And that kind of request can be accommodated. But yeah, it's really impressive just
super
how
cool.
Extensive the catacombs are.
Oh yeah, super cool.
And then of course, you can't go to Rome without visiting the Colosseum.
Definitely.
So once a place of blood, it is now a place of prayer as well as a tourist attraction. So many persecutions and martyrdoms helped to forge a sense of community among early Christians and were used to kind of frame their internal conflicts over orthodoxy and social identity. After Rome became Christian, 14 stations of the cross were installed around the perimeter of the arena, further marking it as a holy site associated with Christ's passion and the martyrs. And every year to this day, on Good Friday, the Pope will lead a torchlight procession around the Colosseum commemorating the passion of Christ and all the martyrs who died there. And last but not least, you've got to stop by the Pantheon. So the Pantheon now known as the Basilica of St. Mary and the Martyrs, is a symbol of Christianity transforming culture. So it was originally built by Agrippa way back between like 25 to 27 years BC. The Pantheon was a temple dedicated to 12 gods and to the living sovereign. Traditionally, it is believed that the present building is a result of the radical reconstruction during Hadrian's period. It is the only ancient Roman building that has remained practically intact through the centuries. In 608, Pope Boniface IV did have the remains of many martyrs removed from the Christian catacombs and placed within the Pantheon. Thereafter, the temple was officially converted to Christianity fully and named Saint Maria ad Martyrs, or Saint Mary and the Martyrs. So the Pantheon was was such an inspiration, to Raphael, one of the greatest architects of the Renaissance, that he actually requested it to be his place of eternal rest. So if you're a Raphael fan, you can stop in and say hi. And of course, we talked a little bit about it, John, you did, right there around the corner. If you're really going for the ultimate pilgrimage experience, you can visit the Scala Santa, or the Holy Stairs. So they are open different times, off and on. And even Martin Luther and many other famous people that would later go on to become saints and stuff on visits to Rome, it was part of your pilgrimage to climb up the stairs on your knees. And the stairs originally came from Jerusalem and said were to be part of Pilate's Praetorium, and that Christ would have walked on them.
No, definitely appreciate you going over the history. There's a lot. Like I said, this is going to be a packed episode of history. One thing we want to stress is Rome, it's not a museum, it's a living church. So it's has such historical significance there. So another thing that you can expect is pilgrims to be attending mass in basilicas or even in the catacombs, like Bethany said. Also joining papal audiences, again, Wednesdays and Sundays. So we'd have to keep that into account as well. And then walk the ancient path of martyrs. And then another thing, too, is we guide pilgrims through Rome with prayer and context, so people aren't on their own to, go through this pilgrimage. We have obviously great guides that walk through you with prayer, context, reflection, and ensuring it's not just sightseeing, but a true pilgrimage. Like you said, especially like the Colosseum has become such like a touristy place.
Yeah, it's a touristy place now, and they talk so much about the gladiators because of the films that became so popular and that kind of stuff. So it's always so meaningful to me that like our travelers get to learn about the Christian martyrs and what happened there, and that it is actually still considered a holy site with the 14 Stations of the Cross built into it now, and that they still have the tradition on Good Friday of leading people around it. So.
For sure. So of course, still feel free to take your snap a picture there. You have to when you're there.
Yeah. And I mean, the guides will talk about the gladiators and the different things that happen in the Colosseum outside of the martyrs, but it's
a little bit more of what to expect, the first glimpse of St. Peter's Square. And pilgrims often describe it as breathtaking, like entering the heart of the church. And also the sounds of thousands praying the Angelus with the Pope in the square. It's just unforgettable. It's an incredible experience that clients will get to have there. And then something that we see a lot of pilgrims say is Rome isn't just a place you visit, it's a place that visits you. It imprints itself onto your soul. That's something that's very powerful there. A great place to visit. And then in closing, just to give you a little recap, so Rome and the Vatican, again, like we said in the beginning, it is the center of Catholic life, the tombs of the apostles, the home of the Pope, and the heart of the universal church as well. So, and it's also a place to reconnect. So you can come here, and to come here is to encounter the living tradition of our faith, past, present, and future. So, with that said, come with ETS to Rome, because again, this is a faith-based pilgrimage. It's not sightseeing, although that is built in, but this is a pilgrimage to Rome, where you'll have the opportunity to pray at the tombs of St. Peter and Paul, stand in the square with Catholics from every continent, walk the streets where saints and martyrs made faith come alive. And of course, Rome, like we said, is the heart of the church, and every heartbeat of faith leads here. And then another great one, too, is in Rome, the story of the church becomes your story, too. So some powerful little taglines to leave you with there. So this will wrap up this episode of the ETS Travel Podcast. Again, this was very informational, a lot of history covered here. If you have any questions about anything, definitely feel free to ask us. It's a lot to unpack. So we definitely appreciate your continued viewership and listening to us here. Definitely feel free to like, subscribe, let us know how we're doing. And personally tell us, give us a call and tell us you enjoyed this and, what you enjoyed about it. And we hope that you continue to listen as we visit more places as we go on here. So without further ado, hope you have a blessed day, whichever day you're listening to this, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
All right, and hopefully we'll see you in Rome.